She was an African heiress, daughter of a powerful Arab tycoon, but no one could know. Sierra Diallo, a stunning black woman with a fortune beyond imagination, was tired of being seen as nothing more than a billionaire's daughter. Men didn't love her. They loved her wealth. So she vanished from her world of luxury, disguising herself as a maid in a 5-star hotel, determined to find a man who would love her for who she truly was. That's when she met Karim al-Fayed, a ruthless billionaire who trusted no one. To him, she was just another worker, until she wasn't. But when the truth is revealed, will love survive, or will betrayal destroy everything? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Now, let's dive into this shocking story. Sierra Diallo had spent her entire life surrounded by wealth, power, and privilege. But for the first time, she was about to throw it all away. Born to a black African mother and a powerful Arab tycoon, she had never known struggle. Raised in luxurious palaces, educated in the finest schools in Europe, and worshipped by high society, Sierra was a woman who could have anything she wanted, except love. Every man she had ever met wanted the same thing: her father's money, power, and empire. They whispered sweet words, pretending to care for her, but she always saw the truth in their eyes. They loved what she represented, not who she was. And she was done with it. The mansion was silent as Sierra stood in front of her walk-in closet, staring at the endless rows of designer dresses, handbags worth more than most people's salaries, and shoes that had never touched the ground. None of it mattered anymore. She reached for a plain black duffel bag and packed only what she needed: simple clothes, a passport under a different name, and just enough money to survive on her own. She was leaving behind her identity. Her heart pounded as she placed one last item inside, a silver bracelet her mother had given her before she passed away. It was the only piece of her old life she would take with her. As she zipped up the bag, she heard a soft knock on her bedroom door. "Sierra?" She turned to see her younger brother, Idris, standing in the doorway. He was only 18, but had the same sharp features as their father, the same intensity in his eyes. The heir to the Diallo fortune. He wasn't stupid. He could see the packed bag, the determined look on her face. "You're really doing this?" he asked, stepping inside. Sierra exhaled, nodding. "I have to, Idris." His jaw tightened. "You're running away from everything. From us." "I'm not running away," she said firmly. "I'm looking for something real. And you think working as a maid is going to help you find it?" She gave him a small smile. "It's the only way." Idris sighed, running a hand over his face. "Father is going to send people after you. You know that, right?" "Not if he doesn't know where to look." He hesitated, then pulled a thick envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. "I figured you wouldn't let me stop you." Sierra blinked in surprise. Inside the envelope was a stack of cash. Not enough to live lavishly, but enough to survive until she got her job at the hotel. "Idris." "Take it," he said, "and be careful." She swallowed the lump in her throat and hugged him tightly. "Thank you." As she pulled away, she could see the worry in his eyes. "Just promise me one thing," he said. "If things go wrong, if you ever need help, call me." Sierra nodded. "I promise." By the time Sierra stepped out of the private jet terminal in Dubai, she was no longer Sierra Diallo, the billionaire heiress. Her long, silky black hair was tucked under a simple headscarf. Instead of designer dresses, she wore a plain, beige uniform, the kind worn by maids and service workers. She had arrived at the Crystal Palace Hotel, one of the most luxurious hotels in Dubai, where royalty, billionaires, and the world's elite came to play. The kind of place she would usually check into with her father's name attached to the reservation. But today, she was just another employee. Her new boss, a strict-looking woman named Madame Soraya, barely glanced at her when she handed over her forged papers. "You'll be working in the executive suites. No speaking to guests unless necessary. No distractions. Understood?" Sierra nodded, keeping her gaze lowered. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. And remember, maids are seen, not heard." The irony of those words wasn't lost on her. She had spent her entire life being watched, admired, envied. And now, she was invisible. Her first days at the Crystal Palace Hotel were uneventful. Cleaning expensive rooms, making beds for guests who would never acknowledge her existence, polishing surfaces that already gleamed. But everything changed the moment she walked into Suite 1803. Sierra had no idea who the guest was. All she knew was that the room was marked for VIP service, meaning she had to be extra careful. She knocked twice before stepping inside. The scent of expensive cologne filled the air, mixing with the crisp freshness of the linens. The curtains were slightly open, revealing a panoramic view of the Dubai skyline. And then she saw him, Karim Al-Fayed. Even if she hadn't recognized him from business magazines, she would have felt his presence the moment she stepped in. Tall, powerful, dangerous. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, dressed in a fitted white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his dark eyes sharp, calculating. His broad shoulders and commanding aura made it impossible to look away. She froze. His gaze flicked toward her. "Who are you?" Her breath caught. She wasn't supposed to talk to guests. "Just the maid, sir," she murmured, keeping her voice low. Karim's gaze didn't move from hers. He was studying her. There was something in his expression. Curiosity, suspicion, something else she couldn't name. "What's your name?" he asked. A lie. She needed a lie. "Sophia," she answered. Karim didn't look convinced. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his energy almost suffocating. "Have we met before?" Panic rushed through her. If he recognized her, everything would fall apart. "No, sir. I'm just the maid." She bowed slightly and turned toward the bathroom, hoping to escape the weight of his gaze. But she could still feel him watching her. She had wanted to be invisible. But in that moment, she had never felt more seen. Karim Al-Fayed stood near the massive window of his penthouse suite, his gaze fixed on the glittering skyline of Dubai. The city stretched endlessly before him, his empire, his playground, his battlefield. He had built his fortune with ruthless precision, carving his name into the world of luxury hotels and elite business circles. Trust was a currency he had long stopped believing in. And yet, something felt off. His sharp instincts, the ones that had kept him ahead of his competitors and shielded him from betrayal, were now stirring over something seemingly insignificant. A maid. Sophia. The moment she entered his suite, something about her had struck him as unusual. She had kept her head lowered, spoken only when addressed, but there was a stiffness in the way she moved, a controlled grace that didn't belong to someone accustomed to servitude. He had met women from every corner of the world, royalty, heiresses, celebrities, all desperate for his attention. He could spot pretense a mile away. And she was pretending. Karim turned from the window, his thoughts still lingering on the strange tension in the air when she had quickly disappeared into the bathroom. He wasn't a man who wasted time on trivial matters, but something about her, about the way she had looked at him, then quickly looked away, made him want to know more. Sierra, still hidden behind her fake name, forced herself to breathe as she wiped down the pristine marble sink. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. Karim al-Fayed. She had read about him in financial magazines, heard his name whispered at elite gatherings, seen his face splashed across business headlines. Ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. He was a man who controlled everything and everyone around him, and now she was standing in his suite, pretending to be nothing more than a lowly maid. She had prepared for this. She had studied how to move, how to speak, how to blend into the background. But nothing had prepared her for the way he had looked at her, as if he was peeling away her disguise with just a glance. She could feel his presence even from across the room. He hadn't left. Was he still watching her? She forced herself to focus on her task, scrubbing the sink as if her life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. If he figured out who she really was, everything would fall apart. Just as she finished, she turned and nearly collided with him. Karim was standing right there, too close. His presence was overpowering. The heat of his body, the scent of his expensive cologne, sharp, clean, with an edge of something dark. She took a step back instinctively, but the counter behind her stopped her retreat. His gaze studied her, unreadable, intense. "You're nervous," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something deeper. "Why?" Sierra swallowed hard. She forced her expression to remain neutral. "I'm not, sir." A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, as if he knew she was lying. "Where are you from, Sophia?" Her stomach clenched. She had rehearsed this. She had prepared for this exact question. "Senegal, sir." His eyes flickered with something. Curiosity? Doubt? She couldn't tell. "You don't look like someone who has spent her life cleaning rooms," he mused. Her fingers tightened around the cloth in her hand. "And you don't look like a man who cares about maids," she shot back before she could stop herself. Silence. Her heart stopped. Had she gone too far? Karim let out a low chuckle. "You're interesting, Sophia." She bit the inside of her cheek. She didn't want to be interesting. She wanted to be invisible. "I should go," she said quickly, stepping to the side. But before she could leave, his voice stopped her. "I'll be staying for the next month. I expect my suite to be spotless every day." She hesitated. "Understood?" he pressed. Sierra nodded, forcing herself not to run. "Yes, sir." She stepped out of the suite and into the hallway, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had planned to blend in, to disappear. But Karim al-Fayed had just noticed her, and something told her he wouldn't stop looking. Sierra rushed down the pristine hallway of the Crystal Palace Hotel, gripping the cleaning cloth in her trembling hands. She needed to breathe, needed space, needed to get away from the intense gaze of Karim al-Fayed before she lost herself completely. This was a mistake. She had spent her entire life preparing for this, rehearsing every scenario in her mind. She had perfected the art of humility, of blending into the background, of lowering her eyes and speaking only when necessary. She was supposed to be invisible. And yet, he had seen her. Not just in the way a wealthy man acknowledges his staff, not in the way a guest barely glances at a housekeeper. He had studied her, his dark eyes sharp, curious, as if he were peeling away every layer of her disguise, stripping her bare with nothing more than his stare. She hurried into the service corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You okay?" She snapped her head up to see Maya, another maid, leaning against the storage cart. Unlike Sierra, Maya had worked in the hotel for years. She was sharp, observant, and knew everything about the guests. Sierra forced a breathless smile. Yeah, just my first time in a VIP suite. Feels overwhelming. Maya smirked. You mean the fact that you were just alone with Karim al-Fayed? Sierra froze. Was it that obvious? Maya nudged her playfully. Don't worry. You're not the first maid to get flustered around him. Sierra frowned. I wasn't flustered. Maya raised an eyebrow. Sure, and I don't need this job to pay rent. Sierra forced out a small laugh, but inside her nerves were still rattling. What's his deal anyway? She asked carefully. Maya's smirk faded. He's powerful, ruthless, and doesn't trust anyone. Women throw themselves at him, but he doesn't keep them around for long. And if he notices you... Sierra swallowed. What happens? Maya shrugged. He either gets what he wants, or he finds out you're lying. A chill ran down Sierra's spine. She wasn't just lying. She was living a lie. And if Karim al-Fayed ever found out who she really was, everything would come crashing down. She straightened her back, pushing down the panic rising inside her. This was just a minor slip-up. Karim had no reason to suspect anything. She just needed to stay invisible, do her job, and avoid any further interactions with him. That would be easy. Or so she thought. The next morning, Sierra walked into Suite 1803, carefully balancing the tray of fresh linens and cleaning supplies. She had been assigned to this room again, but this time she was prepared. She would be quick, efficient, and get out before Karim even realized she was there. But the moment she stepped inside, she knew she wasn't alone. Karim was sitting on the edge of the massive king-sized bed, dressed in a crisp white shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, sleeves rolled up. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and he held a black watch in his hands, adjusting the strap. He looked effortless, unbothered, in control, unlike her. He looked up. Sophia. She froze, gripping the tray tighter. Sir. His eyes moved over her, studying her the same way he had the day before. She didn't like it. Or maybe she did. That was the problem. Relax, he said, standing up slowly. You look like you're expecting something to happen. Her breath hitched. I'm just here to clean. Karim smirked. Good. He walked past her toward the balcony, grabbing his phone. She took the opportunity to move quickly, changing the sheets and wiping down the furniture, doing everything in her power to ignore his presence. But then, his voice cut through the air. You don't belong here. Her hands faltered for a split second. She forced herself to keep working. Excuse me, sir? I've seen women like you before. Sierra turned slowly, her heart pounding. Did he know? Karim leaned against the balcony doorway, his sharp eyes locked onto her. You walk differently. You speak differently. You're careful. Too careful. Sierra felt her throat tighten. She needed to end this conversation. I'm just here to work, sir. Karim tilted his head, his gaze never leaving her face. Are you? She forced herself to meet his stare, willing her hands not to shake. Yes. A long silence stretched between them. Then, just as suddenly as he had cornered her with his words, Karim turned away, dismissing her. That'll be all, Sophia. Sierra didn't wait. She grabbed her tray and practically ran out the door. The moment she stepped into the hallway, she let out the breath she had been holding. He was testing her, and she had barely passed. She needed to be careful. If Karim was already suspicious, it was only a matter of time before he dug deeper, and when he did, there would be nothing stopping him from uncovering the truth. Sierra spent the rest of the day trying to push the encounter out of her mind, but Karim al-Fayed's words kept echoing in her head. "You don't belong here." He was watching her too closely, studying her movements, testing her reactions. She had trained herself to blend in, to move through the hotel unseen, but something about her had caught his attention, and that was dangerous. As night fell, she sat on the edge of her small bed in the cramped staff dormitory, staring at the ceiling. She had spent her entire life surrounded by luxury, silk sheets, crystal chandeliers, but here, everything was small, plain, and ordinary. The walls were thin enough that she could hear the muffled conversations of other maids and the distant sound of room service carts rolling down the hall. She reminded herself that this was what she wanted: to live without privilege, to know what it felt like to be normal, to find love without the weight of her father's fortune hanging over her. But now, Karim al-Fayed was in her way. If he kept pushing, if he kept watching her, everything would unravel. She needed to be careful. She needed to stay invisible. Or at least, that was the plan. The next morning she was back at work, carefully avoiding any interaction with Karim. She made sure to take assignments on different floors, stayed busy in the laundry room, and did everything she could to keep herself out of his line of sight. But fate had other plans. As she pushed a cart full of fresh linens down the hallway, Madame Soraya's voice stopped her. "Sophia!" Sierra turned, quickly lowering her gaze. "Yes, ma'am?" "There's a last-minute event in the ballroom tonight. We need extra staff for the evening service. You'll be working as a server." Sierra's pulse quickened. She had specifically chosen housekeeping to avoid situations like this. Serving at an elite event meant being seen, being around powerful guests, and, most terrifying of all, being near Karim again. Madame Soraya was already moving past her. "Report to the ballroom at 7, and wear something presentable." Sierra swallowed hard, gripping the handle of the cart. She had no choice. The ballroom was stunning. High ceilings, massive crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. The tables were set with fine china, gold-plated cutlery, and rare wines imported from France. The guests were some of the wealthiest people in the world, men in tailored suits, women dripping in diamonds. And among them, at the most prestigious table in the room, sat Karim al-Fayed. She had hoped he wouldn't be here. She was wrong. He looked effortlessly powerful, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He wasn't smiling. Karim never smiled. He observed the room the way a king might survey his kingdom, calm, dominant, and completely in control. Sierra took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. He wouldn't notice her. There were dozens of staff members moving between tables. She would serve, stay quiet, and leave. Simple. But when she approached his table with a tray of wine glasses, she felt it again. His eyes. They were on her the moment she stepped closer. She kept her gaze down, placing a glass in front of one of the guests, moving efficiently, barely breathing. But when she reached Karim, she hesitated, and he noticed. He looked up, dark eyes locked onto her, like he was waiting for her to make a mistake. For a long, unbearable moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached for the glass she had placed in front of him. His fingers brushed hers just barely, just enough. Heat shot up Sierra's arm, and she pulled her hand back too quickly. His lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something darker, amused, curious, intrigued. "You're nervous," he said softly. She forced herself to breathe. "Just doing my job, sir." Karim tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Are you?" The unspoken challenge in his voice sent chills down her spine. She needed to leave. Now. Sierra quickly turned away, moving to another table, her heart pounding in her chest. Karim al-Fayed wasn't just watching her anymore. He was hunting her. Sierra moved through the ballroom as if she were walking on glass, careful, deliberate, pretending not to feel the weight of Karim al-Fayed's gaze following her every move. She kept her head down, serving drinks, clearing plates, moving efficiently between the tables. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, she could feel it, the tension in the air, the silent game he was playing. He wasn't just watching her, he was waiting. She had barely made it halfway through the room when she heard his voice. "Sophia." Her steps faltered for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Slowly, she turned. Karim was standing now, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his stance relaxed yet commanding. The other guests at his table continued their conversations, oblivious to the way his attention was entirely on her. A few servers passed between them, blocking her view for a brief moment. But Sierra knew he expected her to come to him. She could ignore him, pretend she didn't hear, walk away. But something told her that if she did, he wouldn't let it go. Swallowing her nerves, she approached his table. "Sir?" Karim studied her, his expression unreadable. Up close, he was even more intimidating, his sharp features cast in the golden light of the chandeliers. His cologne, dark and expensive, wrapped around her senses. "You've been avoiding me," he said casually, as if it were a simple observation. Her pulse jumped. "That would be unprofessional of me," she replied, keeping her voice calm. His lips twitched, just barely. "Would it?" Sierra's fingers curled into her apron, hidden from view. "Is there something you need, sir?" Karim tilted his head slightly, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her want to run. Or maybe worse, stay. "Tell me something, Sophia," he murmured, voice low, almost like a secret meant only for her. "If I asked you where you were from, what would you say this time?" Sierra's breath caught in her throat. She kept her face neutral, her mask perfectly in place, but inside, her thoughts were spinning out of control. He didn't believe her. She had been careful. She had rehearsed every detail of her fake identity, trained herself not to make mistakes. And yet, he had noticed. She had two choices: lie again, or turn around and leave before she said something she couldn't take back. Sierra chose the latter. "I'm needed in the kitchen," she said quickly, stepping back. "Excuse me, sir." She turned, her heart hammering against her ribs, desperate to get away before he could say anything else. But before she could take another step, his voice stopped her cold. "Not yet." Something in his tone made her freeze, not a command, a challenge. Slowly she turned back. He was still watching her, his expression a mixture of intrigue and something far more dangerous. "You don't act like the others," Karim mused, almost to himself. "You don't move like someone who has spent her life serving the wealthy." Sierra forced herself to keep her breathing steady. "You watch people," he continued, his voice slow, deliberate, like someone who isn't used to being ignored. Her stomach twisted. She needed to end this conversation. Now. "I'm just the maid, sir," she said, her voice polite but firm. Karim's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "No," he murmured, "you're not." For a moment, neither of them moved. Sierra could feel the heat of the ballroom pressing in on her, the low hum of conversations in the background, the distant sound of a champagne glass clinking. But none of it mattered, because in that moment, Karim Al-Fayed saw her, not as Sophia, not as a maid, as a liar. Her fingers clenched at her sides. She could not let him win. "Enjoy your evening, sir," she said smoothly, forcing herself to walk away before he could say anything else. But as she left, she felt it again, his gaze, still watching, still hunting, and she knew this was just the beginning. Sierra didn't stop moving until she reached the staff hallway, her heart hammering in her chest. She pressed her back against the cool tiled wall, trying to steady her breath, trying to push down the panic rising inside her. He knew. Maybe not everything, not yet. But Karim Al-Fayed had seen through her disguise. She had spent years preparing for this, rehearsing every detail, ensuring that no one would ever question who she was. She had lived as Sophia, the maid, for weeks without suspicion. Yet, in just 2 brief encounters, Karim had cracked open the carefully constructed lie she had built. He was dangerous, not just because he was powerful or ruthless, but because he was watching her too closely. "Sierra!" She flinched at the sound of her real name, before realizing it was Maya, hurrying toward her with a tray in her hands. "You okay?" Maya frowned, glancing at her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sierra forced a breathless smile, shaking her head. "It's nothing, just a long night." Maya didn't look convinced, but didn't push further. "I'd say. You got stuck serving at the VIP table, huh?" Sierra nodded, pretending not to care. "Yeah," Maya smirked. "Bet that was interesting." "Karim Al-Fayed, up close? You're lucky. Women would kill for that." "Lucky." Sierra almost laughed. If only Maya knew. Karim wasn't interested in her the way most men were. He wasn't chasing her like the women who threw themselves at him. He was hunting the truth. And if she wasn't careful, he would find it. Maya set down the tray and leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Be careful with him." Sierra stiffened. "Why?" Maya shrugged, but her expression was serious. "He doesn't like secrets, and he doesn't stop until he finds them." Sierra swallowed hard. That night, when she finally made it back to the tiny dormitory, she locked the door and collapsed onto the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. She needed to be more careful. She needed to stay invisible. But something inside her knew it was already too late. The next morning, Sierra focused on her work. She kept her head down, moved quickly, stayed as far away from Suite 1803 as possible. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. At noon, Madame Soraya called her into the staff office. "You've been assigned to personal service for Mr. Al-Fayed," she said briskly, handing Sierra a schedule. Sierra's stomach dropped. "Personal service?" she repeated. Madame Soraya barely looked up from her desk. "You'll be in charge of maintaining his suite exclusively. Room service, laundry, cleaning, whatever he needs during his stay." Sierra couldn't breathe. This wasn't a normal assignment. This was deliberate. Karim had done this. He had requested her. She gripped the paper in her hands, trying to keep her expression neutral. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "You'll start immediately," Madame Soraya interrupted, already moving on to another task. "Go." Sierra walked out of the office in a daze. There was no avoiding him now. Whatever game Karim Al-Fayed was playing, she had just become his opponent, and she wasn't sure she could win. Sierra stood outside Suite 1803, her fingers tightening around the cleaning cart handle. She wasn't ready, but it didn't matter. Karim had requested her, and refusing wasn't an option. Taking a slow breath, she knocked twice before stepping inside. He was there. Sitting on the leather couch, one arm resting casually along the back, his dark eyes already locked onto her like he had been waiting. "Close the door," he said smoothly. Her pulse spiked, but she did as she was told. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, finally, he spoke. "I don't believe you, Sophia." Sierra's breath caught. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You're hiding something." Her fingers curled into fists. This was it. She had to play the role perfectly. "I don't know what you mean, sir." Karim's lips curved slightly. "We'll see about that." What happens next? Karim isn't letting this go. Will Sierra be able to keep her secret, or will he expose her true identity? Subscribe now, like this video, and turn on notifications. The next chapter will leave you speechless.